Hello and welcome to another episode of the Brett Campbell Show. In today's episode, we have a really exciting one. Actually, I had a lot of fun. I learnt a lot interviewing Dr. Kevin Stock. I originally have sort of just embarked on, I'm 9 days in, and we talk about this in the podcast, but I've just embarked on a carnivore diet. And I actually searched online and came across Kevin's information and followed his sort of breakdown, his philosophy around it. And of course, I did as I always do, reached out and wanted to get him onto the podcast, so I could actually ask him some questions that will, one, inform me, but also inform you on what this carnivore diet is. Why would you even want to look at it? So Kevin is a strict carnivore and self-experimental researcher. He's been passionate about health and fitness for 2 decades. He's the founder and CEO of Muscle Science and a national-level physique competitor, so he's pretty shredded. He began his professional career as a dental sleep medicine doctor, where he treated obstructive sleep apnea. We actually talk about that in the show. He's actually just come out with a new product which will actually stop you from snoring. In his own private practice. From there, he invented the NED device. This is the one I'm talking about. It's an intranasal device designed to treat snoring, which is super cool. He writes a lot. He's got his own blog at kevinstock.io and also meat.health. If you're interested in, exploring or experimenting with different diets and different ways of eating, I highly recommend checking this episode out. I'm not going to share what's happening for me right now. I actually share it in the episode. We talk about how my first 9 days are going, what I've been feeling. We also talk about the standard questions that you would normally have if someone's embarking on this. Like, how are you going to get fiber? How are you getting your vitamins and minerals? How do I implement cheat days? Do I have cheat days? Should I have cheat days? I asked them that because I was a little bit curious myself, actually. I've felt like one, maybe a couple of times. That's about it. But other than that, been absolutely fantastic. We talk about Beyond Meat. We talk about why meat is not sustainable for the world. Well, that's what I originally posed the question of. We also talk about the dangers of a plant-based diet and so much more. So make sure you do, as always, take a screenshot of you listening to this on your mobile device. Head over to Instagram. Upload it to your stories, tag me at Brett Campbell Official. Also tag Kevin at Kevin Stock 12. So Kevin Stock 12. And if you enjoyed the episode, please share it. Make sure you share it. Let us know. Head over to iTunes, give us a 5-star review because that's always nice of you. Join all the other awesome people over there who have been doing that. Thank you to you. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Dr. Kevin Stock. Dr. Kevin Stock, welcome to the show, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, I reached out on Instagram maybe a week or so ago because I did a podcast on one of my last podcast guests, and he sort of triggered something inside of me that I'd always wanted to do, and I was thinking about doing, and I was looking at and exploring. And, I come from the health and wellness space. One of my first companies that I created 13 years ago was in the health and wellness and the fitness space. And I've always had a passion for uncovering, different ways of doing things with our body and how our body reacts and all of the above. And the guest I was talking to last time, Travis Bell, actually, shout out to Travis, he said that he's on the carnivore diet now. I'm like, I've always wanted to give that a bit of a crack. And I said to him, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And jumped online, did a few searches. You went through the Sean Baker, sort of the, once you're on Joe Rogan, you pop off, you're a world famous leader in anything, exactly. Right? When you go on that podcast. Yeah. Hopefully one day we can have that effect here. But you popped up, right? So your site popped up, meat.health it was that I went on it, looked at your protocols, and was like, I'm just gonna follow it, right? So I was like, you know what would be nice, and a bit of a win-win for both of us was, I was like, I'm going to follow this guy's protocols. Why not get him onto the podcast and ask him as many questions as I possibly can, right? Which I know is going to benefit me. It's also going to benefit many of my listeners because for the last week I've been telling everyone that, I'm on a carnivore diet, and we'll get to that in a minute. There's some funny stories, but everyone's pretty much taking it well, going, let me know how you go. Right, so there's a massive curiosity, I think, out there, and a feeling of what is this thing? There's so many diets out there. I want to know, firstly, what led you to this whole carnivore diet. So maybe before we break it down and really explain what it is. What was sort of your path leading up to this?
Yeah, sure. Because it does need to be broken down, because the first thing you'll look at when you search carnivore diet is like the beautiful simplicity of, just eat meat, and drink water. It's as simple as that. And then when you get into the weeds, there's a lot more that you need to uncover, you need to unpack, concerns, transition symptoms, things like that. So we can dive into all that. But what led me to it was, so like you, I've been passionate in the health and fitness area for my entire adult life. I grew up an overweight kid, and I'm starting in junior high. I started like, I wanted to, this was something I wanted to figure out. And, having done what I thought was every diet experiment in the world, I thought I cracked the fitness code, so to speak. I did physique competitions. I thought I knew it all. And, about 5 years ago, that physique body composition became less of a priority, and my new priority became more of this mental performance. I was starting a couple different companies at the same time, and I couldn't be living on the coffee I was living on. And so really my priority shifted to like, I want to get my mental performance where my body was. And, since I'd been reading, studying, even writing about teaching, health and fitness for years, I'd heard about the ketogenic diet, did the ketogenic diet, but in the past, when I did the ketogenic diet, I had always cheated, and not on like donuts or anything like that, but I cheated on protein. I always had more protein, because from a body composition standpoint, I couldn't let myself go down as low as common ketogenic, diet protocols would say. A lot of times they want you to eat around, 0.75 grams or less of protein per pound of body weight.
Oh, wow.
And for me, was kind of like, I don't want to do that. I'm afraid of where that's going to go. Long story short, I went into it. I was like, all right, I'm going to restrict protein a little bit. I'm going to go super high fat, no carb, see if the ketogenic diet solves my problems. And it didn't, but I lost a ton of muscle mass. And so I was like, all right, there's got to be something else.
The last thing a man wants to do.
Exactly. I was like, I'm going to set the ego aside. I'm willing to like take some sacrifices in that arena, but not to the degree. And I was like, I've lost so much size. I know that's not like a healthy thing. I'm wasting away muscle mass. And ketogenic dieters are going to be furious at me for saying that. But I'm not against ketogenic diet whatsoever. But we can go into that. Long story short, I know I said that we're dragging it on here, but
hey, we got all day.
I had other things that I'd studied, like anti-nutrients and contraindications of plants. I took more seriously, because I evaluated my diet. What was my ketogenic diet? Well, there was a lot of broccoli. There was a lot of plant-based fats. And so what I did was I started removing plant-based foods one after another. And as I did that, I started eating more and more red meat, because I need to get fat from something besides just eggs. So I was eating more red meat, less plants. And then I got to the point where I was eating just meat, and basically MCT oil was the last remaining food before I cut that. And I just felt better than I ever had. And so in 2017, I started writing about it, basically just sharing my experience. I put up meat.health, basically transition symptoms, things that I went through, and then other people started going through as well. And, basically put together this guide that I think you saw. And that was in 2017. And, since then, Baker, you mentioned Dr. Sean Baker got on Joe Rogan, which really kind of, catapulted my site up quite a bit, because, it brought a lot of awareness to the diet. And my goal was never to just eat. I didn't set out with the intention of going on a carnivore diet, because I didn't know it was even a thing.
Right.
My intention was, find out what was going to help me perform at a mental level, be able to keep a body composition that I was happy with. And, all meat was like revolutionary for me. It's like, I never felt so good. And people are always like, well, was it removing the plants or was it adding red meat? And I think it was a combination of the two of them. But yeah, that's what led me there.
Yeah, you're a doctor by trade, if we want to call it that, by trade, but you studied to be a doctor. So you're a dentist, right?
I'm a dentist.
But now you specialize in sleep therapy and a whole heap of other things. What do you spend your time doing now? Like, what do you do during the day? Like, because I don't think you practice dentistry, right, anymore? Or
Yeah, I've taken a unique path.
Right.
After dental school, I opened up a practice exclusively treating obstructive sleep apnea. It's called sleep disordered breathing. So everything from snoring to severe obstructive sleep apnea.
Yeah.
So I set up that practice. One thing led to another. So dentists have a unique ability to treat sleep apnea. We could dive into this if you want to.
I do. My wife would be really happy. I think she's told me off a few times this last week for snoring, so I'm sure she'll be pleasant to look for some remedies.
Yes. So dentists have a unique treatment option for sleep apnea. It's oral devices that work. They'll move your jaw in a position that keeps the airway open. A lot like CPR, they teach you, lift the jaw to open up the airway. That's how these devices work.
Are they super uncomfortable?
In a nutshell. Well, that leads to the next thing. So they work to varying degrees, for mild to moderate sleep apnea. They tend to work quite well for the right patient. Like you mentioned, moving the jaw forward a little bit can be just fine. A lot of it can be quite uncomfortable, cause TMJ issues, teeth movement, things like that. So because of the issues I was happening in my practice, a lot of success, but a lot of times people will be like jaw issue, teeth issue, this, that. I'm like, there's gotta be something else that I could do to supplement this treatment where I can move the jaw a little bit, because when you move the jaw a little bit forward and you stabilize it, you get the bulk of the results. Where the problem comes is where you really try and pull the jaw too far forward to get the last bit of results, and then you get all kinds of side effects. So I got this idea for this device. Now I call the NED device. It's a nasal Epap dilator. It's basically something that goes in your nose, and it works by two mechanisms. One is it dilates the nasal cavity, makes it easier to breathe in. And the second function is it works by Epap, which is expiratory positive air pressure. So when you breathe out, you breathe against a slight resistance that keeps the airway from collapsing. And my idea was, if I use this with an oral device, I'm going to be able to treat all these sleep apnea patients that I see, the most severe, everybody. And I thought that was going to be great. So, 5+ years I've been developing this device, and it works for snoring just wonderfully. We're not FDA approved for sleep apnea yet, so I'm always very cautious because you don't want to make medical claims for a device that doesn't have FDA approval. So right now the devices we're just selling to treat snoring, and it works very, very well to doing that. And my long hopes is that it will treat, people will use it to treat mild and moderate sleep apnea, and used in conjunction with oral devices. So that's the long story of the sleep apnea.
What is sleep apnea? Break it down. What's actually sleep apnea? What causes it?
Yeah, I probably should have started there before I just.
That's all right. This podcast, the listeners are used to going from one thing to another. Welcome to the inside of my brain. We'll be taking a number of roundabouts at the moment, but
that's how mine is. We go one way.
Let's go. I'm sleep apnea. How about that? What about this?
Yeah.
We'll be back to the carnivore diet in a minute, folks. Don't you worry.
Yeah. So sleep apnea is when you go to sleep, and you have an airway, right?
Yep.
And that airway, muscles relax, tongue falls back, you get this collapsing of the airway. And a total collapsing of the airway is a complete apnea. So you're basically not breathing, you're basically suffocating.
Right.
And there's various degrees of apnea. So if the airway's closing just a little bit, but enough where the oxygen in your blood is not getting saturated to its full extent, they start classifying that as, hypopneas, and we don't need to get into all the technical stuff, but there's varying degrees of apnea. So it's basically a closing off of the airway or a complete shutting down of the airway, where basically you're not breathing, and the blood is not getting oxygenated like it should, which isn't delivering that oxygen to the essential organs and tissues that it needs to, causes a host of problems. One being severely affects quality of life because you're never getting a good sleep, because the body doesn't want you to die in your sleep. So when that airway closes, the body shoots adrenaline through you, and you have micro arousals. So you won't consciously necessarily wake up. Sometimes you will. But the body just keeps falling asleep, waking itself up, falling asleep, waking itself up. So people are very, very tired that have sleep apnea. Serious, risk with, heart disease, dementia, it's associated with basically every chronic condition we have today. So it's a serious issue, but quality of life is a huge one, because people that have sleep apnea, they just can't function during the day. If you imagine just not sleeping, and the average time between diagnosis and getting treatment is 10 years. So it's 10 years of being a zombie.
Wow.
So it's one of those things where I enjoyed it. And one of the reasons I went into it was when you treat a patient with sleep apnea, it's like
You change
the
your
next
life.
day the next day they're like a new person.
Yeah.
So it's very rewarding. My next favorite thing in dentistry was pulling out teeth, because like if you have an abscess tooth that's killing you, you know, you pull that tooth out, you're like a new person. It's like the 1 minute fix. But yeah, so you know, that's the essence of what sleep apnea is. And so my day job these days is, you know, I've been doing very part-time pediatric dentistry. So I have done some general dentistry, but I focused on the pediatric population, basically in lower socioeconomic areas. Right. Then I've been working on this NED device, getting it developed, launched, which we're finally there. Now we're trying to go through FDA hoops.
Right. So how do you fix sleep apnea then? Like how can you treat that?
The traditional kind of gold standard is something called a CPAP machine.
Yeah, the machine, right?
It's like you wear a mask,
like Darth Vader,
a Darth Vader mask. What it does is it pumps air through your airway, so it's basically a pneumatic splinting of the airway.
Yeah.
And if you can imagine, like, people don't like that treatment. Over half the people, you know, these people are dying in their sleep.
Yeah.
And over half the people that are given it, they just can't wear it. Yeah. So that's what, you know, another reason I went into it is like, this dentist had this great option that's like, look, we're not pumping air down your throat.
I couldn't imagine anything worse. My stepfather's actually got one. And I mean, you look at it from how it affects your life, but how it also affects your partner's life. I mean, they've got to sleep next to a fucking machine, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would irritate me more than me not breathing. But so yeah, continue.
Yeah. So CPAP is kind of the traditional gold standard. Yeah. And you know what? It saves lives. And I as much as like I talk about these other options that people have, just because it doesn't work for over half the people, you know, it does save lives. If someone has sleep apnea, especially severe sleep apnea, first thing they should do is go get a CPAP, or there's other BiPAP, AutoPAPs, but that's the first thing.
Right.
Now Epap, which is the technology that the device uses that I've been developing, is basically works the same concept, except for the positive pressure, the PAP, positive air pressure. This is using expiratory positive air pressure. So it's basically using your own breath, your own exhalation to provide that air pressure, and not some machine that's pumping it down your throat. So the mechanism of function is quite similar. And then, you know, dentists have the option it's mandibular repositioning. So they move the jaw in a position to keep the airway open. So those are kind of like the three main treatments to help this airway, you know, collapsing, not collapse.
Right. So what's this NED device then? So that's already out. Did you say you're already selling that?
It is out
for snoring.
It's out for snoring. Yeah. So
and what is it, like a mouth guard or?
No. So it's nasal inserts. So you put them in your nose, just 2 nasal inserts that dilate the nose. So the dual function, one is the dilation, because a big part of snoring too is if you can't breathe in well through your nose, that's going to exacerbate everything. Yeah. So the one function of the device is to help breathe in, and then the other thing is the EPAP. So there's exhalate when you breathe out. There's a little bit of back pressure that helps keep that airway from collapsing.
Right. And
that's what the NED device is. You just stick it in your nose and you go to sleep.
Oh yeah. You ship those things to Australia?
We do, in fact.
I might have to give one of those a whirl. Cool. All right. So sleep obviously is, I think it's one of the least forgotten, well, it's the most forgotten, topic of conversation when it comes to living an optimal life, right? We do it, supposedly we're supposed to be doing 8 hours a day of it. That's a third of our life. Yet there's very little conversation and very little talk about it, because people I went to bed at 10 and I woke up at 6, assuming that they got 8 hours sleep, but really they might have got 3 decent hours, if that, right? So the quality of sleep is huge. How have you found nutrition to affect sleep?
It's a great question. So, and I agree with you 100%, is that it's funny. My professional career, I focus on treating sleep, and kind of in what I spend even more time doing is talking about nutrition, researching nutrition, writing about nutrition. That's what I spend most of my time doing, actually, is now in the nutrition side. And that's always been what's fascinated me the most. But sleep is the most underappreciated performance enhancing thing that anyone can do.
Absolutely.
If you're not sleeping right, you can eat perfect, you can work out, and you're fighting an uphill battle constantly. But the good news is, like, sleep, working out, eating right, these things all, they don't act in isolation. So if you're working out, if you're sleeping, you're eating right, each one helps the other is what I'm trying to say. And so nutrition plays a huge role in sleep. And one of the reasons is kind of what we're talking about is obesity, overweight, highly correlated with apnea, which is one of the most undiagnosed prevalent sleep issues that, especially in the modern world. So, I mean, just being a healthy weight is going to help your sleep. But nutrition, especially, if you're not these late night, desserts and high carbohydrate foods and really just late night eating,
like a chocolate before bed
is impeding. Yeah, it's hurting sleep.
Yeah. How does it hurt sleep? Let's talk about that. Let's get into a little bit more of the science around it.
Yeah. So, when you are sleeping, digestion takes a lot of energy. And one thing you don't want to do is eating right before bed. So the body is going to focus on, look, I got this bolus of food in my stomach that I got to take care of first. And so it's going to delay your onset of going into a deep sleep. It's going to further delay REM sleep, which is already backlogged, so not as much of an issue. But one of the things that you mentioned earlier is, even if you are one of the rare people that gets in bed at, let's just use easy numbers, midnight, and you wake up at 8 a.m. So you got that I was just going to do an 8-hour example.
Yep.
So even if you get that in bed by midnight, wake up at 8 a.m. If you ate at 11:30, that sleep quality for the first couple hours is going to be diminished. So we start talking about sleep efficiency. How much sleep did you actually get? Even though you were in bed for 8 hours, if your sleep efficiency was 50%, well, then you only slept for 4 hours, right? You only got 4 hours of good sleep. And ideally, most people need 7 to 8 hours of good sleep, not constant micro arousals, not when the body's focused on digestion. And so it's super important.
What would you say a general rule of thumb is before stop eating? How many hours before bed and why?
I think to be on the safe side, 3 hours. Most people do, I think, better 4 hours.
Right.
As kind of like a rule of thumb.
Geez, I think we'd be hard pressed to find many people who do that, right? Like, I mean,
almost nobody, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, I'm sitting there going, well, even if I eat at 6:37, I'm a really early to bed type person.
I am too.
I'm in bed. If I'm not in bed by 9 o'clock, I'm freaking out. Like, this is a late night. Something's going on. I need to get to bed. I get up early too. 5:30.
I'm on the same clock as you, except for in the different time zone.
Yeah, there you go. So when I'm getting up, you're about to go to bed. So I definitely see the value of sleep, and there's so many. You hear so many tips and tactics you can do, and it's like, oh, don't have your phone on before you go to bed, sleep in a really dark room. I read a study where they actually had a pitch black room and they had an infrared light, and they literally was shining an infrared light over someone sleeping underneath the blankets, and it aroused cortisol in their body while they were sleeping. So just that alone increased the hormonal disruption, which is crazy. But people don't see or necessarily feel those internal hormonal changes in the, all the stuff that goes on inside our body. It's like when you sit in and you start your car, you don't actually see what happens in the engine for this thing to actually start. You're just like, well, it starts, right? I don't think people are paying enough attention. I mean, I put my hand up too, even though I'm in this space and I've studied a lot around it, but I don't think we pay enough attention to the body itself, the vessel that we've got. And it's not until you actually feel something that you're like, oh my gosh, I get it. Right. So quick 9 days ago, I'm on my 9th day of the carnivore diet, right? And we'll let everyone know what the sort of carnivore diet and carnivore sort of movement really is. Now, I asked you your reasons of starting. The reason why I did it was a couple of reasons. Is through COVID-19, I put on an extra few kilos, like I think, the entire population might have. And been training for the last 6 weeks. I used to have a body where I could eat anything and everything. And because I'm quite muscular, I used to have a body where I could eat anything, and literally a couple of 2-3 weeks at the gym and I'll shred that fat off really quickly, right? I'll drop weight really quickly. this time around, it sort of hasn't been the case. It's sort of been a bit more of a struggle, right? So I'm like, you know what? I want to try the carnivore diet for one, to be able to see what its impact is on fat loss, right? Two, to actually see how my body goes and feels, right? From an elimination perspective, you know, I've done an elimination diet a couple of years ago for my allergies, but I was still eating veggies and a whole heap of other things as well within that. So this was sort of like a nice mental reset to go, you know, I'm just going to actually get pretty much everything out of my diet except for meat, right? And see how my body responds to it. But also, and I want to put this as a side note, another reason why I really wanted to look at this is for the autoimmune, you know, advantages that it may have, right? So I've got asthma, I've got allergies, you know, they can flare up at any time, and you know, I'd love to see, and I'd love to even hear from your perspective, you know, stories where you might have heard benefits from an autoimmune perspective, especially asthma in itself. Actually, here's the reason why I actually did it. That Travis on the podcast, he said, yeah, it helped clear up his asthma. I'm like, well, fuck, I've had asthma for 37 years, right, since I was born. And if changing or eliminating food within my diet is going to help that, it's going to be a piece of cake. So, mate, I've been on it for 9 days. I've literally had pretty much just meat. I've had a little bit of bacon, and
what kind of meat?
So beef, yeah, Wagyu, rump. Yeah. I've had a whole plethora of it, actually. My question is, am I going to have a Scotch fillet? Am I having a ribeye? Am I having a eye fillet tonight? Or am I going to go rump? What is it? Oh, you know.
Right, exactly.
So I've been basically eating that for the 9 days. And I'll tell you what, the first 3 days in, like I lost all bloating that I had within my stomach, right? Which is obviously a massive one. Like I didn't actually feel fat. You know how you can you feel fat because your stomach's bloated, but
so
I automatically felt like I was almost lean again. I was like, holy crap, that's crazy within itself, right? And I've had that before with other diets that I've tried and so forth. And I know it's the carbohydrates that do that for me.
Yeah, a lot of times it's a triggering something, but yeah.
Right. And then on Thursday, so 4 days in, I had my best fucking workout pump I've ever had in my entire life. I literally felt like I was a rock. I even walked up to my wife because we're training at our home gym, and I was like, touch this, touch my arms. They feel like they're going to pop out of my skin. It was crazy. So I've actually had really good effects in the first 9 days. You know, I've read some stories where people react quite badly. I've had like cravings maybe 2 or 3 times. And the other night it got to a point where I was like, I watched my wife drink her can of Coke Zero. I was like, I just want a Coke Zero. So I just had a sip, like a little, wet my mouth with it. And I was like, that's it, I'm done. I don't need any more. Right. Yeah. So I've actually reacted really well to it.
How's your digestion been?
Great.
See, I mean, and
perfect.
Man, so there's a lot of people that have experienced a similar situation just like you have.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people that like digest. For me, digestion, the benefits that I was getting like with mental performance, just how I felt, was so great that even though my digestion took me a while to get used to, and it was because I was eating so much fiber. Yeah. And so I think a lot of it has to do with like what kind of diet you had coming into it. But the fact that your digestion was good, workouts are good. I mean, and a lot of it has to do with you probably had a pretty healthy diet prior to this.
Yeah, I just know how to have a good cheat day. That's probably my thing. You know, when I say cheat day, it's like when I eat shit, I'll go to town on it. But I'm pretty good generally throughout the week, regardless. You know. But one thing that's interesting, leading up to this, I wasn't eating a lot of red meat because my wife's plant based. Right, she's been plant based ever since she's been plant based for like last 3 years. I haven't eaten as much red meat. Right, because she used to cook it all for me, and now she doesn't. So I'm like, it should be right. I'll get something easier. I'll sort something else out, right? Or I'll eat what she's eating. But one of the big things for me has probably been the sustainability in my energy levels.
Yep.
Right? Exactly. And I mean, it all makes sense, right? When you think about it, it's like, well, of course it does, you know, glucose causing insulin spikes and blah, 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 blah.
Right, you're not going on that roller coaster all day long.
Absolutely. So I've actually had a pretty pleasant experience. My bowel movements are frequent. It's as per normal. Actually, probably a little bit less, a little bit less than what I used to, but I've actually had a pretty good experience so far. So it's been interesting.
That's great. And you know, so before I started the carnivore diet, I'd been eating quote unquote healthy for, a decade and a half. But when I evaluate the two diets, they're actually almost night and day different, because in my more, body composition focused years, I was eating lean meats, a lot of chicken, just lean meats, like a lot of white meat and a lot of vegetables. And now I'm eating almost all red meat and basically no vegetables. And so even though I would consider both like quote unquote healthy diets, there actually are quite vast, very quite different, right?
It is.
And, I feel the difference.
Yeah, like for me, I never ate a lot of veggies anyhow. I was I only ever ate veggies because in my mind, I was like, oh, well.
Wife is telling you to.
Well, yeah. No, I could hear my mum in the back of my ear still going, eat your bloody veggies. But it really is. It's the stigma. Well, I don't know if stigma is the word, but it's the narrative that's being played out in the world where eat your veggies to be healthy, right? Like I don't like broccoli, but I'd only ever eat it because I'm like, oh yeah, the green leafy green vegetables are healthy for you, right? But the real truth, I think, comes down to how you feel. That's like, there's no denying, because again, I've got a list of questions here that I want to go through, because these are you would have heard these 10,000 times, no doubt. Because it's always, this is the whole thing when you're trying to break the pattern of someone's mindset of what's healthy or what's not healthy, And
it is very, like you said, it's so different than the narrative we hear.
Very.
That it's like, whoa, this is a little insane. So,
well, the first thing is like, because I go get a couple of times throughout lunchtime, I've gone down to a burger place down here and got some beef patties for lunch, right? And I literally went in there and I said, just four of the beef patties. She's like, anything else? No, just 4 patties. So no bun? Yeah, no bun. Okay, any cheese? No, so just the patties, like nothing else except for the patties. And she's like, really? I'm like, yes, really, of course. That's what I fucking asked for. But I went down there yesterday and she's like, 4 beef patties? She knew my order already. So, But case in point there, you said something earlier, right? The thing that normally messes up a lot of people's digestion or their bowel movements and so forth is the fiber. Right, the backup of fiber. So talk to me about that. This is one thing that, and my wife's going to be listening to this podcast. She's asked me, she's like, well, how are you getting your fiber?
So look, the narrative affects us all, even because I thought I was very well informed prior to this. And I was like, I think I need fiber and then you ask me and I'd be like, you know what? I don't know what for, I know we have a very small amount of ability to ferment fiber, so for some short chain fatty acids in the colon, but like it's really minuscule. So to try to make that argument, it turns out like fiber does a lot of people more harm than good. And so I wrote an article on fiber, and kind of the take home message of the article was, I think if you look, what is fiber in? Fiber's in fruit, right? So I think it helps make fruit, where you're getting this hit of glucose and whatnot, it's helping stabilize blood sugar a little bit. So the point is, like, I think it helps foods that I'm not going to say are bad or unhealthy or necessarily, but it helps make them less bad, right? Because if you get that blood sugar spike, if you get that sugar without the fiber, then you have a greater blood sugar spike, and in an unnatural way. Whereas, fiber can help kind of neutralize it a bit. Right. But the essentialness of fiber is, it's just not there. I mean, I didn't eat fiber for 3 years, and I'm standing right here. I'm not backed up or anything like that. So, and there's a lot of people that have done this as well. But the fiber myth, that's not one that's going to die soon. But one of the things that did it for me is I've always been kind of scientific oriented. Like, I was a chemistry major in college, and I did biology and dental school, and I've always been studying the sciences and looking kind of through that microscope. And it wasn't until after I got out of professional school when I kind of zoomed out in nutrition and was like, looked at it from an ancestral point of view. And I'll tell you what, the ancestral point of view to me, and it's when I talk more about the ancestral point of view that people start to be like, okay, I kind of get that, if people will buy into kind of evolutionary ancestral perspective of a human diet. Because we'll look at basically the gorillas, apes, our closest ancestors who've got these gigantic guts, right? And the way they're able to eat leaves and sustain their big bodies is because they can ferment that fiber and turn it into fat. So they're actually being fueled by fat because they have that ability to do that.
I read that. When I read that, I think that was one. Yeah, was that in your article? Did you say?
Yeah, so I've written about this quite a bit.
When I read that, it was sort of like a penny drop moment where I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, because where are you ever educated that a gorilla, when it eats leaves, turns it into fat? Like, when along your life are you ever going to have a conversation about that unless you're intentionally exploring it?
Right. And that's how these gigantic animals, have you ever wondered, like, how does that 500-pound animal live on just leaves? Like, if we try and just eat leaves tomorrow, we're dead, right? And we're not lasting very long. And it's because we don't have this ability to ferment fiber and turn it into fat in any appreciable way. Like, we do it like just a little amount. And so when we start to look at how the human body is designed versus how a herbivore body is designed, for example, there's different functions that allow us to process food. And if we look at our digestive tract, and one of the reasons why your bowel movements might be not as voluminous is humans absorb meat with extreme efficiency. And so there's a lot of people that will go on a carnivore diet. They'll be like, man, I haven't gone to the bathroom in a week. It's not uncommon when they start. And really, I mean, and it's not that they're constipated. They're like, I think I'm constipated. I'm like, well, it's probably not actually. You're just absorbing everything that you're eating right now. And your body's used to just tons of fiber to flush everything out. And when you're just absorbing it, it's called waste for a reason. You're just not wasting anything at this point in time.
And then the next one after fiber, and I mean, it's easy to trace back and go, fiber was made popular by these huge companies looking to sell their cereals, high in fiber and low in fat. It's like, what the?
Yeah, and the fiber. So the early beginnings of fiber was, I'm drawing a little. I talk about it in this article in more depth, but the overview is, there's this doctor who is starting to notice these, these modern diseases of civilization that didn't exist 100 years prior to him. And he was like, well, we've been refining these. This is like when we're doing refined grains in the, Industrial Revolution, 1700s. And he's like, well, when we are refining these plant-based products, these grains, we're removing the fiber. So it's got to be the fiber that is causing the lack of fiber that's causing this spike in heart disease and obesity and whatnot. And that original hypothesis, this fiber hypothesis, is, and like you say, the companies that, took that and ran as a marketing thing. But that hypothesis has proved false. But right now in the narrative of the world, it still is not known that that's been false.
Yeah, like when you got companies, huge companies selling the fact that, or backing studies to prove that sugar is good and good for your body and you need it. And, you just need to look at the tobacco industry when fucking smoking was when they said smoking was healthy for you. They had athletes smoking cigarettes, to promote it. So, there's a lot of money to be made in the food industry, that's for sure. So there's the fiber conversation, right? Then there's but if you cut out vegetables, how are you going to get your vitamins?
Yeah, so that's one of the most common questions. The special concern is vitamin C is probably the most common concern. And the short answer is, meat and animal provides complete nutrition. You don't have gaps in vitamins and minerals. Now the quantities is what we can look at, and people will be like, well, the quantities are low. So if you're eating just meat, the quantity of vitamin C you're eating is much lower than if you're eating a bunch of fruit, right? However, what gets totally lost in the conversation is the quantity that you really need based on the food that you're eating. And so there's this theory around vitamin C. So vitamin C and glucose look very similar molecularly. And so they can compete for absorption. So if you're eating a lot of sugar, you have high blood sugar, it's a common sign of diabetes. People start to look like they have vitamin C deficiency, like they're early stage scurvies. But if you don't have high blood sugar, you're not eating a lot of carbohydrates, the amount of vitamin C you need is probably substantially less than if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet. And this is true with various vitamins and minerals. So that's kind of the short story of it. And people are like, what? So you eat steak and just animals and you get all your vitamins, all your minerals, all your macronutrients? Yeah, you do. It's complete nutrition. So I don't know how else to put it to people besides like, yeah.
and I guess the way to prove that, right, it's having blood work done and seeing, you know, how your body actually responds to just eating meat. I mean, that's probably the best thing to do, right? I intend to do this for 30 days, right? I've been a little bit, you know, I haven't jumped into level 2, just meat and water, which is part of your programming, let's call it.
I think of it just of like a framework, because people don't know. It's for me, it's just a framework, because people think it's like, I'm like, you have to do level 1, level 2, level 3, and I'm like,
it's not really black and white, right?
No, I was just designed as a framework to help people wrap their head around this, to help them have success. Because sometimes if you go in blind, you go just need water, you have side effects, you're like, whoa, or something's still going wrong. It's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just this helps kind of figure things out.
You know, and I think that's the important thing here, right? Like, yes, I've had great experience. I'm 9 days in. I'm feeling great. It's all fantastic. I've had only a couple of cravings. I thought I would have had a lot more cravings, which just means obviously my body's satisfied, right? You're craving for certain things because your internal hormones are doing some crazy shit, and you're requiring something that you think you need to give you more of that hit.
A lot of people do have a sugar addiction that is real, and they do struggle with that the first 30 days. But some people more than others. For me, it wasn't such an issue because I didn't eat a whole lot of sugar prior. So that varies person to person for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. And, you know, just because I'm having a great experience, it doesn't mean someone's going to have a great experience 5 days, 9 days in. You know, hey, I could hit a lull today and things happen, or my digestion. But the point that I'm making here is that it's important to do, and this is something that I liked and vibed with your way of thinking, was you just got to start listening to your body, right, and seeing how it responds, you know. And to my point of the people who are like, oh, but, you know, they discount something before they've even experienced it. It's like, oh, I'm not going to get my vitamins, I won't do it, I won't have enough fiber, I won't da-da-da-da. It's like, but have you actually tried it and experienced it? So I'm planning to, at the end of 30 days, go and get bloods done. And I should have done it earlier. I should have done it pre. I know that. But I'm definitely going to go and see what's happening under the hood, you know, in 30 days. And if I'm deficient in something, I'll just find something to prop it up, right?
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is super important, because really there's two things that people should evaluate. And we tend to put all the emphasis on objective numbers. What does that lab number say? And we ignore with, how do you feel? How do you look? How are you performing? Like things that are the most telling of your health, we ignore those. And then we look at a number to be like, tell me if I'm healthy. I'm like, okay, let's back up for a second. And I've done a lot of writing. If you've poked around on my website, you've seen it, but I've talked about labs as well. And when you're eating an all meat diet, you need to have a smart doctor who's informed about your diet, because certain things, like cholesterol is a good example. If your LDL goes up, it's totally like expected. But if your general dentist, if your dentist is checking your cholesterol, run the fuck out of it. If you're giving it to your dentist and helping to get answers, big mistake. But no, so an elevated LDL could be just totally perfectly normal consequence of, you know, a higher fat ketogenic kind of style diet, because it's the way metabolism works. But if your primary care physician doesn't realize that or doesn't know that, which, you know, look, these primary care physicians, they mean the best. They're well intentioned, but you know, all this nutrition stuff is like, you know, it's here, there. They can't know everything, and so it's important that they are familiar with like very low carbohydrate diets, ketogenic diets, because certain numbers will change, and it'll be totally like expected change. But it could send like a red flag, and they're like, all right, we got to put you on a statin, or and I'm like, whoa, that's maybe not the best move. So the short story of it is like evaluate subjective symptoms, because that's really going to be the best predictor of your real health. If you're feeling great and you're looking great and you're performing great, like that's very telling. The objective numbers important. Keep an eye on them, but it's also just a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
You get your blood work done today, you get it done the next day, you get it done the next day, you do it at various times of the day, you do it various seasons. These things change.
Yeah.
How did you sleep last night? Like there's so many confounding variables when you get blood work that I'm not going to say they're meaningless, because they're not meaningless, but it's like one dot. And if you're trying to like see what direction you're going in, you need a lot of dots to see where you're really going.
Yeah.
So it's good to get a dot, but then don't just change directions, because you only got one dot really. You need another dot, another dot, another dot. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, look, it's evaluating data based off your particular requirements as well. And what I mean by that is there can't be one set of numbers of this is what your cholesterol should be, this is what your X should be, that fits 7 billion people. Like it's clearly evident that there are many different ways that we can eat and we can fuel our body to reach a certain result. Right? Yes, we are programmed that you need to get energy, you need carbohydrates. Right? Now, again, the argument could be said if you're a marathon runner or you're, doing some long distance racing, that you probably would require the carbohydrates. I actually talked to a girl just a couple of days ago. She goes, yeah, when I did Kokoda, which was like a 7-day trek right through the mountains, she went on a keto diet, really low carbs to start using fat as an energy source through that period, right? There's times and places to use fuel sources, but for general health, I think what my recommendation always is try what works for you, but not only that, because a lot of it will probably work for you, but try what would be the closest to your perfect outcome, right? So for me, my perfect outcome out of this would be able to go through, eat meat, and, my symptoms sort of dissipate and so forth from an autoimmune perspective. But then I introduce, because the only thing I'm missing right now is potato, right? I love potatoes, right? I could just live on meat and potato. I could already declare that I could live on meat and potatoes for the rest of my life. I don't need anything else, right? I don't need ice cream, don't need none of that shit. I'd be happy with meat and potatoes. If anything, I almost feel like, for lack of better terms, if we call this a diet, a transition that I'm testing right now, this has been the most fun and the one I look forward to most, right? Because I actually look forward to what I'm eating. Yeah. Like, there's nothing worse than
sustainability. You got to have some, you
absolutely,
can't be suffering the whole time.
Like when I was doing, prep for bodybuilding, it's like, oh, I'm just going to have fish and beans. I'm like, oh fuck, I can't wait for dinner tonight, right? Like it's just not cool. So let's look at you've written an article, The Dangers of a Plant-Based Diet. What's that all about? Tell me, what are the dangers of a plant-based diet?
So
and Emily, listen on up, because there's something here. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So I guess it was a catchy title, but it's this little ebook, because it's basically like an 80-page ebook. And the health dangers of a plant-based diet. And so what I did was laid out basically the research I'd done over the years. So I took a plant. And a plant has got roots. It's got a stem. They have leaves. They have fruit. And so I took all these plants and I said, look, let's look at a root and let's see what potential, like we assume eating carrots is good, potatoes, good foods, right? Well,
don't tell me potatoes are the only thing you can't do on this.
I was going to tell you to watch out for the alkaloids, but
the only thing you can do on this podcast before I cut it off is don't tell me potatoes bad. But continue. I'm not ready. I'm not ready for anything like that just yet.
the point of the ebook was to point out that we assume these foods, and I talk about potatoes in it. I talk about fruit. I talk about broccoli and spinach, kind of like the assumed good foods,
the staples.
People don't question these foods. And then this article, and it's not just my voice, because I don't consider myself an expert. I learn from the experts. And I have this, if I have any ability, I have a good ability to be able to digest this information from experts and then kind of present it in a way where more lay people can understand it.
Yep.
And so that's what I did with these various plant parts. So I'm like, okay. And one of the things that the article highlights is when you're eating that junk food, do you realize where it comes from? Most of it's come from plant-based parts, refined, whatnot. But even not refined, we talk about these different plant-based parts that may, research shows you, like, look, the anti-nutrients, these toxins, this is what these things can do. And so the ebook goes through the plants and we go through kind of the biggest anti-nutrients, the biggest, toxins to be aware of.
Give me a couple of examples there.
Your potato one,
Yeah, give me. All right, I'm ready for it. Give it to me. What do you think about potatoes?
We talk about alkaloids, and the good news for you, like from the research, it looks like alkaloids can definitely be a problem if you eat a lot of potatoes. So that's what would make me worry about your meat and potato only diet. I would not be worried if you had potatoes, like a potato once every 3 days. Not worried about it because the body has ability to handle toxins. So the point of the article is not to be like, look, there's bad things in these food, you can't eat any of them, because we have these bodies, these magnificent livers that do a great job at detoxing things. But if you're eating, we basically eat a 70% plant-based diet plus, and we overload the body's ability to handle these things, and that's when things go haywire. And so we talk about that. We talk about oxalates. Oxalates is a big one. So if you eat a lot of spinach, you eat a lot of kale, people that eat these massive spinach salads every day, day after day, healthy people, they can have problem with oxalates. So you can be overdoing if you have a salad once a while, what is that going to kill you? Probably not. You're going to do just fine. But if you eat oxalates a ton over time, which is very within the range of possibility, you can have problems.
So I can't imagine you being a fan of the Beyond Meats.
Well, the vitriol is, you get. I kind of expect it. I put myself out there to share this stuff.
Absolutely.
And I title my website. If you visit it, it's on the title bar. It says "Notes to Self." But for me, it's just a reminder that look, I'm writing this for myself. I'm not pandering to any audience. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything.
Yep.
This is my thoughts. Take it or leave it.
But I think it's an important thing, right? It's like, I'm not going to come to your website that you've put up and you've written and then trash it. It's like, well, that's your thought. I can then, and unfortunately most people don't think like this though, is I can take what you're saying. Like you could say here that, this isn't good or that's not good because of X, Y, Z. It's then up to me to actually take responsibility and go and find out a little bit more about that. Go and find some supporting research. Because we could sit here and if we had a plant-based expert on and they believe plant-based diets is the way to go, you're sitting here, we're talking from a carnivore meat-only sort of perspective as the way to go. And then you get someone who's like, only seafood. And like everyone's got a version of how we can eat. And there's always supporting documents and studies.
You can find whatever you want to find. I've learned that.
Yeah. Which goes back again to my ethos of you just actually have to try it yourself.
You do. You do. And I think, one of the best ways to look at food is, let's say every food has pros and cons. Okay. Then you have this spectrum of food. Well, if I look at red meat, it's on this end of the spectrum. It doesn't have these anti-nutrients. It's like congenitally the safest thing you can eat is red meat. Okay. So on this side of the spectrum, like meat, very safe. Whole food, plant food might be middle. It has vitamins, it has minerals, it has macronutrients. So it has nutrition. Like you get nutrition from that and the body can get nutrition from that. So there's definitely positives. Now there's also anti-nutrients. There's plant-based toxins, phytochemicals that the body has to detox and deal with. But, where is that on the spectrum? It could be for some people on the right side. It could be a little bit further on the left side for other people. Yeah. And then we got the modern food today, all the processed, refined, the pastries, the breads, the pizzas, everything. That's on the other side of the spectrum. It's, I have a hard time even calling that food. And I just think that perspective would be,
it's nice. It's nice tasting poison. That's what it is.
It's like
why is it so fucking tasty?
Honestly,
I think I almost need to be hypnotized so that anytime I ate something like that, it tasted like dog shit or something, and then I'd be like, okay, I'm done. I don't need it.
Well, one thing you might realize at the end of your experiment is your body doesn't want those things. Right. And I have, kind of hypothesized that our body is very good at adapting. And if you're feeding it junk and junk and junk day and day and day and day, it's going to adapt, and it's going to be able to tolerate that to more of an extent. Now, if you go and clean your whole system out, you're running on like a Ferrari on the proper fuel, and then you go put in some cheap fuel in there, you're gonna be like, oh man, I don't feel good. This doesn't, I'm not doing that. And so it does kind of like, for me, I don't have desire to eat a lot of bad foods. And if I do, I don't need much of it. And if I do indulge too much, then I'm like, oh, that was a mistake. I don't really need to make again. Yeah.
Well, you've been following this for how many years, did you say?
So I've done just meat for 3 years, and I did a carbohydrate experiment last year. So it had been 2.5 years where I hadn't eaten. I did 2.5 years without 1 ounce of fiber, 1 plant-based food, nothing. And I had gotten decent reading base, and people have been asking me like common question. Well, if I reintroduce carbohydrates, like how am I going to feel? And my answers were always unsatisfactory to me because I'd hypothesize. I haven't done it. Yeah. So I ran a set of carbohydrate experiments so I could speak a little bit from experience as well as, what I think would happen, from kind of like a intellectual perspective. And, the experiments were enlightening, and I learned a lot from them.
That was where you had a tub of honey, right? Talk about it.
Yeah. That is the one.
Because I want to talk to you about the third experiment, but before you get there, tell us about how your body reacted when you had pure honey.
So honey was the first thing I tested. First carbohydrate food I tested after 2.5 years of nothing, and my expectations going into it were totally wrong. Like I thought I was gonna kind of buzz up with like energy. I thought I was gonna get a bigger pump in the gym, maybe a little bit, because a little bit, maybe some glycogen supercompensation, and I thought I was probably going to crash, have some brain fog, kind of the typical thing, right? And like I didn't experience any of that. Like I felt the same, felt totally normal. So it was very like I talk about in the article, it was very much like the most boring results ever. But to me, it was very telling because if the body heals, it functions right, And I talk about one of the articles, a lot of the problems comes down with damage in the gut. And if the gut walls are damaged and you eat something bad, it gets right through the gut walls and it causes problems. But if your gut is just like a brick wall and you eat something bad, well, guess what? You got a brick wall, you can deal with it. It's not going to cause any problems. And that kind of analogy I apply to, other things as well. So
have you seen any studies? Have you seen anything based around, because I like that, again, it makes sense, right? That your body was in such good shape for those 2 years that when you introduced this, it just sort of went straight through the chute, straight through the keeper, right? And how long do you reckon, or have you seen any proof around how long until someone starts to see side effects again from the reintroduction of carbohydrates?
Like negative side effects?
Yeah, or starting to feel the things that you were talking about, crashes, foggy brain, and
I think it's very unclear.
Yeah.
And I think it's so dependent. One thing that gets lost in a lot of this is, for example, I'm in my early 30s. And so my history is different than someone who's in their 50s. Yeah. And I've tried to eat pretty healthy, like I've said, for basically 20 years, versus someone that is in their 50s or 60s who has eaten a standard American diet. Even if we both did strict carnivore diet for 1 year, where we are at the end of that year is still very different. And so it's hard to generalize people, because I always say, we're a human species. We are far more alike than we are different, meaning we should probably all be eating a far more similar diet than different, right? That doesn't make any sense for someone to eat totally plant-based, someone else eat totally meat-based, because in the wild, species don't do that. Species eat a similar diet.
Yeah.
We're basically the only species that messes with our diet like this. So I'm off on a tangent there, but yeah, we're very, as much as we are alike, there are differences that we have to account for in how we've treated our body over time.
Yeah, very true. It's like when someone is introduced to physical training, the adaptations, how quickly you need to change your programming.
Exactly.
If someone comes into the gym, they can go on a 4-week training program doing the same exercises versus someone who's a trained athlete. They need to periodize their training every week, almost every day, changing it up to create those adaptations. So just like nutrition.
It's exactly like one of the most common things because people ask me, like, what do you do for your workout? I'm like, I'm happy to tell you what I do for my workout, but the chances that it applies to you, I mean, you could do it, but if you were to ask me what I would do if I were you, it would probably be something totally different.
And that's the problem.
Goals too. Yeah.
That's the problem with the bodybuilding mags. When I was 16 years old and I walked into the gym, I pulled out Ronnie Coleman's workout. I crawled out of the gym. I crawled out of the gym crying almost. I was like, oh my God, how does he do that?
Exactly.
Took me about 3 hours.
One of the genetic freaks of the world, training for decades. I'm going to just go in with that. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. The context gets lost. That's the biggest challenge I have in like our quick bite social media world. And if you've checked out my website, my articles tend to be quite long. Because what I feel like is missing is context. And I can only say so much in an Instagram post, right? They only give me so many words. I usually max those out. But I always like, look, I want to give people context so they actually understand what I'm trying to say. Because a lot of times people will be like, oh, this guy doesn't, he says you shouldn't eat any plants. I mean, really, that's never the point I've ever made. Especially like the health danger of plant-based diet. Like my point is to present a different perspective and provide context around that perspective. Because I think anyone that actually read that ebook would say, okay, I understand where he's coming from.
Well, and that's the beauty of having conversations like this, where we're able to expand on certain topics and discuss and provide an outlet for people to start doing their own research, because that's all it is. It's you just need someone to be triggered and go, actually, I'm going to find out more about this. Or they might head over to your website, download your book, and be like, this is actually quite interesting. I might give it a whirl for a couple of weeks. Like, don't even commit to 30 days if you don't want to. Commit to 7 days. See how you go at the end of the week, right? If that's what it needs for you to sort of have a starting spot or a transition through. Obviously, I'd certainly suggest committing to a longer time frame if you can, but if you're feeling bloated or you're not feeling, you're feeling that 2 p.m. crash, like there's a joke that is like, oh, I'm getting my afternoon crash. It's like, that shouldn't be happening. Like, that's actually not normal. You're laughing at the fact that you're probably eating shit food that's poisoned your body. And look, I'm not sitting here on my high horse, because I've eaten my fair share of shit food as well, and probably will continue to sporadically over time. So I'm not here trying to preach, but I think a lot of the world's problems would be solved if we actually started looking after our vessels, which gives us better clarity of mind, right?
That's what drives me. I mean, for me, health has always been a thing to be like, look, I want to try and get the most out of life, or at least that's what it is for me now. And that's how I look at it. It's like, look, this is giving me the energy, how I feel. I'm happy in how I look as well. It's like that. There's a quote. It was my quote of the year in my newsletter this year. But he said, I don't live to eat and make money, but I eat and make money in order to like basically fuel life. And I'm like, I couldn't agree 100 more with that statement. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I'm not someone who's, I get interesting you say that, because I've got that philosophy of I eat to live, I don't live to eat.
Right.
So I don't have that. When people are like, oh, I'm in the kitchen cooking this with love, I'm like, I don't get that. But it doesn't mean you're not, but I just like, okay, cool. I'm here to, I'd happily take a pill in the morning if it gave me everything my body needed. Like, I don't need to eat. Now, I'm not saying I don't enjoy going out to dinners and breakfast, socializing. I love all of that stuff.
Right.
But when you got a relationship with food that, is you're always pushing and experimenting, and you're all about taste versus what's actually going into the body, it's a different conversation. But I want to get back to the your first experiment was honey. Your second experiment, I remember, was blueberries, and not much really happened there either. But your third one, this is what I want to talk about. I was quite excited leading up to this, and I was like, cool, a cheat day.
Yeah.
right? For me, I'm like sitting there going, I'm 9 days in and I can't wait for a cheat day, right? There's a part of me going, can I just have, because I've just found a brand new ice cream over here in Australia. Amazing little company, Fiit, shout out to you guys, where we actually get free ice cream, right, from this company. And it's like, what is it? A little small tub, similar to the size of Ben and Jerry's tubs, but it's like 250 calories, right? Mm-hmm. But again, there's obviously, and this is another thing I want to talk to you about is yes, sugar's reduced, but there's artificial flavors and so forth, obviously, that have to go into it, and they have their own story to tell. I'm sitting there going, I just want to eat a tub of that, right? However, I'm getting to your article and I'm like, cool, cheat day. How does this body respond to a cheat day? And then I proceed to read on, and I look at what your cheat day consists of. And I was like, I don't know if I'd call that a cheat day. I think you said you had a little bit of sushi, and then you had a spoonful of your wife's ice cream.
So it was
tell me about that.
Admittedly, it was a cheat weekend actually.
Right.
Because
it was 2 days.
My girlfriend and I went up to Chicago to visit my brother.
Yep.
Just spend the weekend up there. And so she eats healthy, and what I was basically gonna do is like, I'm just gonna eat what she eats, So,
right.
And she's going on vacation, so we'll probably splurge a little bit. And yeah, so the cheat day wasn't severe, but
I was hoping to see a pizza. I was hoping to see like everything.
So, but I thought there was certain things in there that I thought was interesting, because I remember we got on the train to go to Chicago. First thing I did was try some of her coffee, and she put one of those artificial sweetener packets in it, right? And I used to put those in everything. I'm like, free sugar, I'm gonna eat it. Give it to me. One taste of that coffee, I was like, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
Like that sweetener which I had never had a problem with, was kind of like repulsive to me.
Yeah.
And then we had some like trail mix. We went out to dinner a few times here and there. I had ice cream. I tried ice cream, and then we had ice cream the next day. So I did have I had like an ice cream dessert.
Something I liked from that though, you said you literally had a spoonful and you actually felt satisfied. I like that, because that's how I sort of felt the other day. And look, I'm 9 days in here. I'm not 2 years in, but it was that feeling of satisfaction. You don't need the whole thing.
So I have always been the kind of person, I thought that, if I'm going to have ice cream, I don't have a little bit of ice cream. Like, I smash a half gallon.
Yeah.
Like, that has been like my personality. People that know me be like, okay, who ate all the ice cream in the freezer was me, right? Yeah. I'm going to say the biggest benefit that I have found, both personally as well as now like tens of thousands of people, is yes, you get all of this healing, you feel better, you look better, perform better, all these great anecdotal things. What does not get talked about is what gets healed, that needs to get healed, is people's relationship to food.
Yes. And
if everyone was able to just have one spoonful of ice cream and be like, oh, that tastes great, but I don't need any more than that, so I'm done. We wouldn't have obesity epidemics, right? But the relationship with food, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, kind of like the addiction to sugar. Yeah. Man, that is what needs to be fixed first. Yeah. And I think going such a pure, clean diet, eliminating all these basically carbohydrates and sugars, as well as plant-based fats, which is another topic altogether, you can heal this relationship. And it's so freeing. So the irony is, okay, a meat-based diet is our meat-only diet, very restrictive, right? You can only eat meat. But like, I've found the most freedom in eating by doing this, because I'm not a slave to these sugars anymore. I don't have to eat the whole half gallon anymore, which was like, look, that's what I needed to do before. So yeah, it's the one thing that I think is why I highly recommend people get educated about it. Because if people just fix the relationship with food, then you can you could stray here a little bit. But if the underlying foundational relationship with food is fixed, then you're probably going to be just fine.
Yeah, it was the other night I was walking with my wife and I'm like, you know, we're governed by the sizes in which things are created, right? Like a chocolate block. The block of chocolate, like you get the real small snack size, that's just like a tease. then you get the actual standard block size. That's almost too much for a meal, but you can get through it and have it in one serve, right? Everything is created in such a way that we're able to consume it all at once. You open a can of Coke, there's 330 mils. What are you going to do? Take a sip and leave it? Like, you're going to drink the entire thing. I'm like, why don't they have like little 50 ml cans of this stuff? So if you just want a little shot or something, you're like, okay, cool, craving over. You don't have this relationship where you have to finish it. Like when I was a kid, I was like, I had to clean up my whole plate. Or I wasn't allowed dessert unless I ate everything on my plate. Yep. Which programs you have to eat everything on your plate. Even to the point, and it's only been the last couple of years where I've realized where if I'm out at a restaurant or a cafe, very rarely this happens, but sometimes it does, where I'm like, you know, I'm full. I don't need to eat all the rest of this. And I'll happily leave it there. Right. But we're in such a, again, this is the relationship with it, right? Is the programming that we have when it comes to food itself is, I've got to eat it all. It's like people's relationship with money. It's like when a lot of people, you know, when they got money, it's money in, money out. I get it, I spend it. True. I get it, I spend it.
That's the American way, but has that got over to Australia as well?
Well, I think it's everywhere, to be perfectly honest. You know? Yeah. I mean, because then it's like, you spend it. Oh, I'll go get more. I'll get a credit card. Let's use money that I don't have, right? But that's another podcast in itself. But really looking at this relationship is I think the biggest place to start for people is to identify what type of relationship do you actually have. I am someone that I know if I've got a bag of lollies in the house and they're open, they won't be open for long because I will consume the whole packet. I know my habits. So
I think, like, for me, I even learned something about myself, and this is more prevalent with people that have had like yo-yo dieting or bodybuilders, especially. Like, I kind of come from that where, you know, restrictive eating is kind of part of the norm. And for a long time, I would not feel satisfied, like, eating a meal until it almost hurt. Like, the stomach was just so full. And you're like, all right, now that I'm like bloated full, like, okay, now I'm good. Which is like, now, like, looking back on that, I'm like, man, that really is, it's kind of weird. Because now I don't overeat. Like, I don't ever want to be like, all right, I need to eat one more steak. Yeah. Like, I feel like I'm easily satisfied. Yeah. And I don't eat, and I'm not like, I don't eat to the point where I'm in pain. Yeah. Like I used to, but like, to me, like, I was not satisfied until I ate, until I was like stuffed. And it's like, part of it is, I think, if you're lacking nutrients, like good nutrition, the body's going to try and get that nutrition. And so it's like, okay, even though you have a lot of volume in you, you don't have any have any good nutrition. So, but part of it is just that bad relationship with food that I had. And it's like, okay, glad to have that healed, because it feels better to not be uncomfortable after you eat, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. I'm looking back now when I've gone to buffets. You know, right. I've gone to buffets with my mates, and I'm like, I'm gonna fucking slay this buffet. I'm gonna eat so much. Like, what sort of relationship is that? I'm intentionally going in to eat as much food that my body can handle until my genes pop or I feel sick. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, I actually learned that at Pizza Hut when I was a kid.
Pizza Hut for your money,
or you can eat
all the bang for the buck,
or you can eat pizzas. Me and my mate would have a pizza competition who could eat the most slices. Ridiculous, right? I want to ask you, plant-based, so beyond meat, what's your thoughts around this movement that's starting to happen? So plant-based meat patties.
Oh my goodness! I thought at first I thought the question was something else, but yeah, the plant-based meat patties. This is. I think it's something that's not going to work. First of all, so I think it's some. Yeah. Well, one is they're trying to position it as like a health food, and already that. Maybe it's because of the crowds that I hang out with, but it's like so obvious this stuff is garbage. And then their next argument is like eco-friendly. It's not eco-friendly. So, man, they have a lot of hurdles to try and, you know, hop over. I mean, it's going to exist, but I don't think like they got their way into like all the major chains, right? Like McDonald's is serving them. Everyone was serving them, right? I don't know. I think a combination.
What's bad about them?
I hope the propaganda. So it's basically like a vegetable oil, unhealthy vegetable oil. Like, and we can get into this. Vegetable oils is it's one of those things where it's like the narrative is like, these are healthy fats, right?
Yep.
Quote unquote,
they
healthy
come
fats.
from a vegetable. Yep.
Like the worst things you can eat, vegetable seed oils. Like it's up there, but it's their sugar, vegetable seed oils. Same, to me, same thing. People want to get healthy, get rid of sugar, added sugar, get rid of plant seed oils. Do those two things. And if you throw in grains as well, all right, you don't even need to listen anymore. You're done.
Yeah.
But just anecdotally, you'll be eating mostly meat.
True.
But yeah, these it's just a chemical slop, and I don't even know how they disguise it as. I don't know what their claims are. How do they even try and convince someone that's healthy? Are they saying it's a healthy fat? Are they saying it's plant based, which somehow makes it healthy? I don't understand the logic or the reasoning. And we could talk about the sustainability issue. Like, these things are not eco-friendly, which is, I think, kind of like what they're positioning these things as. So
right, what's required to go into making those?
Eco-friendly?
Yeah.
The kind of like the rule of eco-friendly is, look, if you're not taking care of the soil, it's not going to be eco-friendly. And the way to take care of the soil is grazing animals. There's intelligent management. It's regenerative agriculture. So it's an intelligent way of grazing animals to keep the soil healthy. Soil is basically the skin of the earth. And if you peel the skin off, you're dead. And that's what we've been doing for, especially the last 100 years, but, ever since the Industrial Revolution, even the Agricultural Revolution, but Industrial Revolution especially, when, we've really moved to a plant-based diet. So you start monocropping, stripping the soil, man, we're just, backing ourselves into a corner. So yeah, you need animals. And animals are the solution to, environmental sustainability.
But
ironically,
as a world, though, if everyone decided to go to carnivore diet tomorrow, we wouldn't even have enough meat.
Yeah, we probably have to ramp up strategically. I don't think we have to worry about doing that. Because people tell me that a lot. I'm like, okay, we got to worry about smaller steps first. But
well, I mean, it's consideration, right?
Yeah, it is. And there's many things that go into it. Is we'd have to adjust a lot of things from an economic standpoint as well. So it's environmental, it's economic, all these systems come into play.
Yeah.
My next big ebook, well, actually I've been working on that now, after this one was going to be on sustainability, because it's an area I've researched for years. And it's a complex thing where, like many things, you pull this lever and it moves something over here. You pull this lever.
Yep.
So everything is so connected. But it's important, because the climate's been a big thing, and in the news, and it's important. It's an important thing to talk about, because we got one Earth. It's important to take care of it. But I'm not.
It's down the list. It's down the list of things that need to be changed.
Yeah.
Right. I listen to Jordan Peterson actually talk about that and break down, the world's most important things, like, in order to move civilization forward and make the biggest impact. Because something that you said there which resonates is, when you do one thing, like, let's say all of a sudden there's this massive increase in meat. It's like, okay, so is it going to be subsidized? Who's going to be paying for it? Where is it? Big companies coming in, they're going to own the monopoly. Like, there's so much involved in all of any little changes, Right. But to the point I was making with the Jordan Peterson conversation, are you aware? Do you know Jordan Peterson?
Yeah,
yeah, of course you would. Yeah,
he's a all meat eater. So is his daughter.
Well, yeah, that's very true. He did his for absolute health reasons, right, which seemed to have changed them around. But he was talking about climate change, and don't quote me on the exact numbers here, but just to make the point, was in the list of the top 50 things that needed to be fixed on this planet that would make massive change. Climate change wasn't even on the list. Right,
on his list.
Well, on the list that was through, not his list, the list from a number of world economists who had looked at data and looked at all of these things,
right.
and the first thing, or one of the first things, was one, eradicating polio. Second was teaching young women educating young women would have a bigger impact on the world than fixing, climate change, right? So it's interesting how there's so many different things that can have a flow-on effect. But one thing for certain is we need to fix the health on this fucking planet. It's getting out of control, and and if something isn't done about it now, you look at the next generation, 2 generations, 3 generations. It's going to be we're getting lazier, we're doing less, we're moving less. There's no need to be moving as much now because you can connect with everyone through a virtual headset, and you're pretty much going to be in their living room anyway. And food's getting delivered to your door, and it's generally fast food. All right, so we got a lot of problems. We got a lot of problems there that we need to start fixing. Couple final questions here. Is for someone who's wanting to get started on a carnivore diet, what's sort of your prescription around that? Like, should it just be meat and water? Can they have pork, chicken, fish? Can they have a bit of cheese, some eggs? What's your sort of starting point?
So there's a number of ways you can approach it. Before I ever tell people that, the number one thing, and if they're listening to this, they're already doing it, is get educated so there's expectations. Because someone that just dives right in might not. I'm going to say, I get a lot of the people that are having issues contact me, right? But not everyone has a great experience right out of the gate because a lot of things have to change, a lot of adaptations. So if you get a little bit educated, have your expectations set properly, that's going to go a long way to having success. But the next thing has to do with personality. There's I think it's hard to group people into 2 different personalities, but I'm going to do it anyways for sake of simplicity. One is the kind of person that dives all in. I kind of tend to be in that camp. Look, I'm going all in. Let's just do it. Deal with the problems if they come up. Other people in the other camp, they're like, let me just ease in a little bit, right? Now, I think most people do better if they just jump in and kind of like jump into a cold pool, get acclimated. It might be a little uncomfortable at first, but just do it versus tiptoe, slowly ripping off the Band-Aid. But for some people, that is better. And we can talk about what kind of person is which, but for general recommendations, I think jumping all in is a smart approach, even if you have a little bit of symptoms early on. If you're generally healthy. If you're super unhealthy, maybe not. Maybe you want to do more of a tiptoe approach. That said, so kind of like the framework that we were talking about earlier is like 3 levels of transitioning or getting into a carnivore diet. The first level would be just, animal-based foods. Don't get super strict. If you want to have bacon, eat bacon. If you want to have pork, eat pork. If you want to have eggs, eat eggs. If you want to have your morning coffee, definitely have your morning coffee if you're a coffee drinker. Because like one of the things that could, throw things right off the gate is like, okay, I'm gonna give up coffee and give up carbohydrates and all these plant-based foods all at once. And then the symptoms are just like, oh my God, it's too much. So kind of like that level 1 is like, look, eat meat-based foods. Don't worry about the rest. Level 2 is like, let's go into the next stage and get rid of some of those, I'll call them gray area foods. Dairy being a classic one because a lot of people have issues with dairy. A lot of people have like addictions with dairy too. That's like, once they have one piece of cheese, it's like, whoa, I need like more and more and more. So level 2 is more about, let's go ahead and get rid of some of those gray area foods and see how you feel. Level 3 is if you need it. A lot of times people don't ever need to go to level 3, which is really just beef and water, but that's kind of just like the pure elimination diet. So if you're still having issues with level 2, you go to level 3, really just purify the diet. Like, okay, like all of the variables have now been removed. Do that for a month or so, see how you feel. And then you can test foods back in. So you're just like, you know what? Life is not going to be the same without dairy. And so you're like, I want to have dairy. Okay, you did level 3, let's try it in. You try it in, a little bit of dairy, and you do fine. You're probably fine, right? This is kind of like the intuitive eating at that point where you're doing fine. If you want to have your morning coffee. So that's one of the things that I wanted. I don't think coffee is a health food. I'm not trying to make that argument and self-justify myself for drinking coffee. I'm like, you know what? I like having a cup of coffee in the morning. And I take it out of the diet. I bring it back in. It doesn't seem to negatively impact me too much. I feel good. I don't crash. So for me, it's just one of those things. Like, it's life. It's one of the things I want. So be it. And so that's kind of what I recommend, but testing these foods off like a clean baseline. So you can be like, oh man, dairy was problematic. Or sometimes, which is why there's level 3, it's pork or something like that, where it's like, I just don't do good with pork. I do better if I stick with beef. and chicken or whatever it is. So that's kind of the framework, the 3-level framework to like both ease into the diet as well as identify potentially troublesome food. Because the reality is most people are not going to eat a pure meat diet the rest of their life.
Yeah.
That's a fraction of a percent of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people can do the carnivore diet, eat a meat-based diet. That's the base of their pyramid. And they could learn what foods can go on top of that base that they do okay with, they feel good with. And so that's kind of the approach I recommend.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I sort of started at a level 2.5. You know, I'm almost that where I'm like, I just want to go meat only. But, you know, I found that I was still able to go out to breakfast with friends, you know, where I had bacon and I just had eggs, you know, no bread or nothing, no extras, anything like that. And so I've had bacon a couple of times but predominantly it's really just been meat. But, you know, if I go out, I'd probably like to have maybe a lamb chop or, you know, something different from a more of a feeling less restricted. Whether I decide to eat that or not, I think is the baseline for continuous behavior around it. And that's what I think a lot of these diets, and this is why I sort of steer the word diet away, because it assumes you're only going to do something for a short term.
Right.
Versus let's just find a pattern that works for you, you know. What are your thoughts around introducing, for someone who's like, you know what, I want a bag of lollies? Yeah.
So this is my thoughts around that. And I'm going to just go ahead and throw people into like 2 different camps again.
Yeah.
There's people that tend to be like all or nothing. And I kind of fall in this group. I'm less so more, but it's like, look, 100% is easier for me. Because if I allow 98% and I let that one lollipop, the one lollipop turns into 100 lollipops and the diet's gone and I'm back to the standard American diet and it's junk, right? So for this group of people, like 100% is just easier to say, look, there are these other plant-based, sugar-based, carb-based options. They're just not a part of my diet, and they can form an identity. That's kind of like the key to behavior change is I now identify as a person that doesn't eat those kind of foods 100% of the time, and it's easier to stick with that long term. Then there's the other people, maybe the majority, maybe not, but who are like, look, I can eat meat 90% of the time plus, but if you say I have to eat 100% of meat all the time, not doing it. I'm just going to go back. I'm just going to eat whatever, you know, back to the baseline junk. And so it's kind of a level of self-awareness where, okay, let's say I'm in this 90% camp. I want to have the freedom to have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And the way to choose this or that is kind of like what I talked about. I think it's the smartest way is you got that meat-based foundation, try foods here, try foods there. You're going to realize some things are better than others. Certain amounts are better than others. So it's like, oh, I ate too much of that. Okay. So then you get a feel for what you like. Like for me, when I did the carb experiments, the foods there's a lot that I was like, nope, not doing that, not doing that. Carrots were giving me indigestion. But the things I did fine with was like blueberries I did fine with, avocado I did fine with, sweet potatoes, as long as I don't eat the skin, I tend to do fine with. White rice, if I keep it small. If I eat a lot of white rice, don't feel good. But so things like that, like you get to know like, okay, these are kind of the things that I can deal with.
Let's wrap up on this note because there's so much more that we could talk about. But rice, because that's an interesting one. You know, you hear people, you know, like, oh, the Japanese eat a lot of rice and they're really lean. You know, break the rice myth. Is rice good or bad, or what do you think about it?
So Japanese and Chinese, they are the 2 leaders in meat eating in the world. And they also are the 2 leading longevity as far as longevity in the world as well. Now there's a lot that goes into longevity besides just meat eating, but like that's an interesting aside. So when it comes to rice, so rice is a grain. I generally recommend not eating grains. Like if someone just wanted 3 rules of thumb for like nutrition, I would say, okay, just don't eat grains, don't eat sugar, and don't eat vegetable oils. And then you're going to be pretty good because you'll realize almost all the junk has one of those 3s in it. And you'll be pretty much left with like whole food, vegetables, and meat, and you'll be in pretty good shape. But as far as I just lost my train of thought there.
Just talking about rice.
Oh, rice, yeah.
Rice. It's that boring of a food that you lost track.
Rice. So yeah, rice. It's a grain along with wheat and corn, which are huge world staples, right? These are responsible for feeding, I don't know, probably half the calories in the world come from those three foods. Of the three, I would say rice is the best bet. And of rice, I would say, a white rice that's been like stripped of a lot of it. It's interesting. The white rice, it's going to have less anti-nutrients, and people tend to do better with white rice. So of the grains, that's the one I would choose. And if you chose to eat it, I would eat a little bit, not a lot. It's linked with a couple studies showing that more white rice you eat, and this is epidemiology, and we can talk about epidemiology. It's basically worthless, but we can draw from what we want. But more white rice eating is correlated quite well with higher rates of obesity and diabetes. So I don't think it's a health food, but it could be a not bad food.
I think again it gets wrapped up in a story that we have, right? That these questions that I'm saying, but how about rice? I mean, that a lot of Asian people eat it and they're a lot leaner, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, well, they actually are the biggest meat eaters. And it's like, where was that bit of information? Right? For most people, there's so much missing links of information. And I think like everything in this world, in order for us to improve, we just need to continually educate. But on that note.
One word on that is that we talk about rice and we talk about broccoli, and we're talking about foods that are orders of magnitude better than the pizza, the ice creams, the cookies, the literally fake synthetic food. Yep. So we're kind of splitting hairs here in the middle when really it's like, okay.
That's an amazing
Those Japanese
point.
are eating just meat and rice. They're eating like on the right side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Whereas everyone else is eating on the left side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So
it's almost like junk food gets a free pass, doesn't it?
Exactly. I'm like, oh yeah. So
it gets its own free ticket.
And rice.
Yep.
You just eat meat and rice, you're doing better than 90% of the world. So,
yeah, that's right. You're right. It's true. There we go. Let's leave it on that note. Kevin, thank you very much, mate. I really appreciate you taking the time out.
It was a pleasure.
Super informative, and no doubt we might have to get you back for a round 2. I'll keep you posted how I go as well. So super excited to see how that ends up.
I would love to hear how your journey continues. Keep me updated.
Absolutely. Last words. What have you got to say to our listeners?
I would just say thank you for your time. Time is a precious commodity, and the fact that someone spent it with me, 2 hours, it means a lot. So, man,
absolutely.
Thank you for your time. Thank your audience for their time, because I don't take that people's time lightly.
I appreciate that, and we'll link up everything so you can go check out Kevin's informative and very long, I will say long articles. So
I got a new one coming out tomorrow. So
awesome, fantastic. All right, thanks, buddy.
Yep, have a good one.